There are certain horror movies or thrillers where they get recommended to me either on the channel or, for instance, in a Google search where I might be looking at more obscure stuff, which of course is predominantly the kind of footage which I cover, the kind of movies which I cover on this channel. But there are some which, due to marketing or the name of the movie, or maybe sometimes the premise, that I put off. I might even own the movie sometimes, and that was definitely the case here. I picked up this movie very, very cheap from a used DVD store, and it is of course called Session 9. Now this is a slightly older movie, it's not ancient though, and it's a movie which I predominantly didn't care to watch, because what I expected it to be was actually not what it was. Because although I cover predominantly horror, with some thrillers as well on the channel, and occasionally other stuff too, I tend to be more of a horror fan in the sense of monsters, whereas stuff like supernatural, with ghost stories, possessions, that doesn't really interest me very much. I've watched a few of those kind of movies. I own some which I still haven't watched yet, such as The Serpent and the Rainbow, again, a slightly more obscure pick within that genre, but it's just not really my thing. So I expected this movie to basically be that. I knew it was set in an asylum. The whole thing about Session 9 is of course referring to doctor-patient discussions, called sessions, obviously, and so I thought I kind of knew what I was getting into when I watched it. There's going to be some cliched little girl wandering around a hallway with wheelchairs turned over and peeling paper on the walls. You know, you've seen it all before. But when I actually decided to put this movie in and sit down and watch it, I was very pleasantly surprised, because this is a great movie. So to those who did actually recommend, and I believe there were at least a couple of people who did recommend here on the channel that I check this one out, thanks for recommending it, because although it took me a while, as it sometimes does, and it shouldn't really surprise me that these movies turn out to be better than I give them credit for, that's the whole reason why I review movies for other people after all, this one definitely did, because this is not just a movie which does well in the horror or thriller genre, it actually manages to, I would say, go above it in many ways. Because with horror, even within the community of fans of horror movies, we tend to be very forgiving. And this is something which I have touched on before, because horror, let's face it, has a lot of trash. And although I am a big horror fan, I'm only a fan of good horror. I don't just watch schlocky movies for the sake of watching them. I look for the good stuff, and that's what I try to review. Whereas for many people, they'll literally just love everything in the genre because of that loyalty. That's fair enough, but for me, that's not really the case. Movies like this, though, I would actually, strangely enough, put in a similar camp to stuff like Alien, back in '79. Not that it really has anything in common with it, apart from that, it's better than what was required. That is often what takes these movies in any genre, but in particular here, horror or thrillers, and puts them over the top. It makes them a step above, or sometimes multiple steps above, most of their rivals, you could say, within the genre. Movies like Alien did that, The Thing did that, Predator even. They're movies which are technically B-movies, just modern interpretations of them, but they're made to a higher quality. As it's been said before, B-movies done A. That is a great thing. And although this movie is more than just a traditional horror, it shares that similar kind of property to it, where it's made better, the casting is good, the performances are excellent in this film, and I think the main thing really that I would say is not so good about it, in fact the only thing, is the marketing. The cover of the DVD, even the title of the film, they're vague enough to make it forgettable unless you've actually seen the film, and that's unfortunate because, as I said, that was what put me off watching it. I thought it was just another of those kind of movies. It really isn't. Now, the basic plot of the story, and as you guys know, I don't talk about the plot a huge amount because you can hear any reviewer talk about the story, so why talk about what everyone else has already said? But the basic plot is centered around a small business who clear asbestos out of older buildings. And for those who are unfamiliar with asbestos, that's a substance which was used in a lot of buildings back in the day, in England, in America, a number of other places, and it has some good properties to it, such as fire prevention, but it also causes major health issues, including death. And that's in real life, not just in the movie. So of course you have these small businesses, van-based or larger companies who will go to older buildings, be it schools or churches, or I guess not so much churches, but places which are built in a time where it was used a lot, and they strip it all out and update it. For safety reasons, of course. It's a legitimate job, a very important one. And it's an interesting concept for a film, because I haven't seen a team of asbestos guys going into a situation in that many horror films. In fact, this is probably the only one that I've seen that happen in. Now, it's a small team. All of the actors are in plenty of other things. You will probably recognise all of the faces, even if you don't necessarily remember all of the names. That's often the case for me. But they are all high calibre, good quality actors from a variety of backgrounds, and they work very well together. Even though they're not all friends as such, they're just there because it's a job, the chemistry which they have works extremely well. And although I said earlier on that you could technically classify this as a horror or a thriller, pretty legitimately so, it doesn't really play out like a horror. Because, again, to get back to the plot, this group of asbestos removal guys go into this old sanitarium, a massive sanitarium. It truly is a huge place. And although you don't get a full scope of the size inside the film or any of the interior shots, it does occasionally show some exterior shots, and it is huge. The layout of the building is referred to in the movie as a bat. You've got this central large building with two wings coming out of either side for male patients and female patients, and it's a fantastic looking building. As I've said before in my reviews of movies like Virus, to me the location in a film is such an important thing, and it's why I would say a lot of movies which could have been a lot better sometimes don't, because the locations or the set pieces are just so bland, really. Whereas some of my favourite locations for a movie would be stuff like a sanitarium, although that's a little bit cliched at this point, but more so stuff like an abandoned boat, such as in Virus, or an oil rig in various other movies, or even something like a remote cabin in, say, a snowy region, or even somewhere in the middle of the desert. They are visually rich environments which almost have an anti-claustrophobic feel to them. Because although claustrophobic environments get to a lot of viewers in films, that doesn't work for me. I actually like claustrophobic environments. I like being in enclosed spaces. So for me, sometimes the opposite works. Two of the most scary locations for me are actually deep in the ocean and out in space, because they manage to be the exact opposite of claustrophobic. They're so big that it doesn't matter how far you go, you're still lost. And to me, that is scary. Whereas this movie plays more on the opposite, the more traditional idea of being in this place which has had a haunted history, not necessarily literally, but haunted by mental illness, patients who have killed people, who have multiple personality disorder or schizophrenia. These scary, real-world problems, both for the people who have it, but even more so for the people who are caring for those, who literally put their lives at risk every day. Now, this sanatorium isn't currently used in the movie. It hasn't been used for some years, and they're just going in to strip out the stuff and basically keep it in good condition. It's a protected building, I believe they mention in the movie, and that's the basic plot. They just go in to strip out this asbestos, and it basically plays out from there. Once the main characters get into the building and start their work, they're pretty much the only guys in the film. There are a couple of other characters at the start, such as a security guard and the guy who's basically like the curator of the place in effect. But beyond that, it's just these, say, 5 guys working. And it's about the interplay which they have. Some of the guys will sneak off to check out some of the old records and sound recordings in this building. And one of the guys in particular finds a number of session recordings, which numbers all the way up to, you guessed it, 9, in which this troubled patient, a woman with multiple personality disorder, is being tried, at least, to be treated by the doctor. And that has an interesting way of intertwining with them in modern times. And I can't really get into it any more than that, but as I said earlier, although it is horror, it doesn't play out like one. It's much more of a character-based drama in terms of how it plays out, with their squabbles between them, distrust, various background issues that the characters have, whether they're friends or otherwise. And as I said, the characters are so good in this film. I think that the strongest thing is the performance of the guys in the film and how they play off of each other, and then the second strongest thing is the location, which is so visually rich, and it feels, as cliched as it sounds, like a character itself. It really does. Now, to get to the actual scores of the movie, First of all, you've got the story itself, the plot, how it plays out, how complex it is, or sometimes how much it can do with a simple premise, which can be sometimes just as good. Well, in this one it is very simple, the premise, but at the same time it does have definite mystery elements, and that lends into the fact that it has a very slow burn, almost like the descent into madness kind of cliche, but done in a much better way, I would say, in this movie than in a lot of other mental health movies which cover that same kind of thing. So I'm going to give it a 7, because although the story isn't necessarily wrapped up in a way which is completely gratifying, I would say, for me personally, and on that point I did actually check out the special features on the DVD. And this very rarely happens for me, but I actually watched the deleted scenes, which also had an alternate ending, and I preferred the alternate ending. I thought it was better than the actual ending in the film, and it tied directly into the other deleted scenes, which I thought were also very good. And this isn't a spoiler really, because of course it's not in the real film, but they completely cut a particular character out of the film, which you can see in the deleted scenes and the alternate ending, which I think would have been great if they'd have left that character in, because this character is mentioned in a general sense, or this type of character is mentioned in the film, but then they don't use any of these characters, and I think it's a shame that they didn't, because they shot the footage and then just didn't use it. But as far as getting back to the score itself of 7, the reason why I'm giving it that is because what it does with the simplicity of the plot is excellent. It's, as I said, much more of a character-based plot than it is a story. It's not, again, kind of an anti-spoiler, this isn't one of those occasions where you go into the place and find out that it's haunted, or that ghosts start popping out, or that monsters actually live underneath the place. It's not that kind of film. This is much more the kind of movie in the vein of stuff like, what could I say, maybe Shutter Island, or those kind of more psychological movies which are very much so character pieces rather than monster movies, which again isn't my forte, but when there's a good one, such as Shutter Island, I love that movie. And I love this one as well. They're those more like psychological, slow burn kind of horror thriller rather than just an in-your-face jump scares every 5 seconds kind of thing. Now, as far as the characters go, as I said, they're excellent. I'm going to give it a 9, and to be honest, the reason why I'm not giving it a full 10 is because of what I mentioned just now, and that is the deleted scenes and the alternate ending, because that one character, although in the grand scheme of things a lot of people probably wouldn't value the character as much as I did, that character, if they were left in the film, and if they were left in the alternate original ending, I would have given it a 10, because to me it is a lot better than the ending in the film. However, that's personal preference, but of course, to some degree, all of these scores are. Next up, we have, of course, the visuals, the special effects, makeup effects, which also includes stuff like cinematography, choice of location, how well the location is used. And in a movie like this, there is some, not prosthetic, but some makeup effects, or there are some, I should say. They are excellent when they are used. There's only one in particular towards the end, but it's very, very visually effective, very striking, and apart from that, it's much more so based on the location than anything else. It's not like a, as I said, monster movie where you've got tendrils flailing about and blood splattering everywhere. It's just not that kind of film. So the visuals are really leaning predominantly on the location, but this sanitarium has so much character that it really does make it strong. The visual experience of the well-lit portions of the building, the exterior shots, the dark shots down in the lower parts of the building with stuff like the morgue or water treatment, electroshock therapy rooms, frontal lobe operating rooms, the kind of almost torture-esque machinery and equipment that was left over that's still there. It's all very striking imagery, which probably sounds cliched. That is, as I mentioned at the start of the video, the exact kind of stuff that you expect to see. Peeling wallpaper, weird drawings on the walls, photos of families that were there, or individuals from families who were there. It is cliched to some degree, but the movie still manages to present it in a very original way. It feels justified, all of it. Everything that you need to see is seen, and it's just a great looking film, I think. The way it's shot is very good as well, very effective, and I really liked it. I thought the visuals were very good, so I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 for the visuals. It's very high. I don't know really what would have put it to a 9 or perhaps a 10 for me. I don't think this is really one of those occasions where it could have gone that high, because the film doesn't need really to show any more than it does. It's actually pretty perfect in that way. I guess you could say maybe an even better camera, perhaps, but again, it's a few years old now, so you can forgive it for that. As far as the audio, which includes, of course, soundtrack, music, sound design, sound effects, I'm going to give it a 7, again, just like with the story. And the reason why is because the music is fairly subtle, but also lends in very well and ties into the eerie kind of atmosphere which the film has. And as I mentioned earlier on in the video, it's not about jump scares. This is much, much more so the kind of movie which is about an atmosphere. There's this building sense of paranoia in the film, which I like how it was done because, and the sound design ties into this, the film becomes more and more paranoid, or the characters in it do, without you really noticing. There are small things here and there which just nag away at their relationships with each other, their friendships, even their maybe not so friendly relationships, where you don't notice it happening until it's all built up more and more and more between all of them. And that was fantastic, and of course the sound plays a big role in that. It wasn't a bombastic kind of soundtrack. I think this is the kind of movie where you actually could have done it with no music at all, and I would have loved that, but at the same time, I do like what they did with it. And finally, for the rewatchability, the fun factor, the entertainment factor, but more so than anything else, really, the rewatchability, I'm going to give it a 7. And although I feel inclined to give it a higher score, because this is one of those excellent occasions where I really did feel like watching the movie back to back twice, but I wasn't able to, this is also kind of at a disadvantage in a way that I've mentioned before, such as in a movie like Rope, for instance, Hitchcock's Rope, where because it has that mystery element, where it's not so much about the journey, it is very much about the destination, with a great journey as well. The problem with any movie like that is once you know how it plays out, after, say, the third viewing, it can hurt it. And the reason why I say after the third viewing is very deliberate. Because to me, mystery movies can, or the good ones, should have 3 prime viewings. The first time you view it, you get the shocking revelation. The second time you view it, you appreciate the build-up and the clues to the revelation, and the third time you watch it, you appreciate the entire package put together. After that, though, that is when a mystery movie can sometimes suffer, because you've almost got everything that you need to get out of the film by that point. And I'm sure that will vary for certain people, but for me it's the rule of 3, basically, when it comes to mystery films. This one I haven't watched 3 times, so I can't say after that. At the moment, I would say that it feels like one which I could watch more, because it is that good. And I don't want to overhype it too much, because it's a fairly subtle film in the way it plays out, but I liked it for that. It wasn't bombastic, it wasn't The Thing, or Splinter, or Harbinger Down, completely different kind of horror, but I really liked it. By far the strongest thing about the film is the characters and the way they're portrayed, so if you are a fan of these kind of movies which play out in that way, where it's very much so about the characters and everything else is just almost happening around them, then definitely check this one out. And as a tabulation of, incidentally, all 5 of those scores put together, I'm giving Session 9 a total score which perhaps isn't quite as high as you might expect, but still a very respectable 3.8 out of 5, which is pretty good. It's not the kind of movie which I would put on par with something like Martyrs, for instance, or 7 Days, but it is very good, definitely a movie which I plan to watch again, and to some degree at least an undervalued one. And as I said at the start of the video, the biggest disadvantage that this movie has is the way the marketing and the packaging of the box looks. It's very underwhelming. It looks very generic, and that's a shame, because this movie is anything but generic. So definitely check it out, and that's it for this pick overall. So of course I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.